Take a loaf of the soft store bread down off the shelf, a cheap one, and before it ever goes in your basket, press your thumb into the middle of the bag. It is a strange thing, is it not? You flatten it, and it rises back up, full and soft, like a cushion shaped into a loaf. You leave it on the counter, and a week later it is still soft. 2 weeks, still soft. No hardening, no mould, nothing changes at all. Now, in my shop I have spent 60 years learning one law before all the others. A living thing decays. A root that will not rot was never truly alive. Fruit softens, grain goes stale, honest food turns in its own time. And we are glad of it because that turning is the sign it was food. A loaf that springs back like a sponge and refuses to spoil for a month was not made for your body. It was made for a warehouse and a long ride in a truck, and most people never stop to think on it. They take the same soft loaf every week and feed it to their grandchildren, morning and evening, because it is bread, and bread is only bread, and everyone eats it. But some of these loaves are real food: flour, water, salt, and yeast, the way bread has been made for 1,000 years, and some are something else entirely, held soft with chemicals and carrying a residue of weed killer that the label will never name. Today, brand by brand, I will show you how to tell the two apart. I am Chen. In my family we have kept a medicine shop for 4 generations, and I have weighed roots and grains on the brass scale behind me since I was a boy, small enough to hide under this counter. My wife cooks from that same tradition, and she will tell me what my grandmother told me, that the food you eat every single day is the medicine you take most of all, not the rare tonic, the daily bowl, the daily loaf. In our old teaching there is a saying, food and medicine come from the same source. It means the first place your health is won or lost is not the doctor's room. It is the kitchen. And that is exactly why this loaf sits close to my heart. Because bread is an honest food when it is made in an honest way. Flour, water, salt, a little yeast. My grandmother's list and her mother's before her. You could count it on one hand and read every word aloud. My teacher taught me to judge any medicine by 2 questions: what is truly inside it, and whether the maker is proud to tell you. An honest maker names everything and stands behind it. The moment a maker begins to hide the grain behind long chemical words, and to hold a dead loaf soft for a month, you may be sure he has placed something in there he would rather you did not think about. Hold on to that as we go through these 10. An honest loaf has a short list you can read, and it grows stale as bread should. Now let me name the 10 I would keep off my own table, the worst of them first. And I will speak plainly the whole way, the way I always do. The loaves I would leave on the shelf. The worst of them, to my eye, is 365 by Whole Foods, the store's own organic loaf. Here is a shop that built its entire name on what it refused to sell, a long list of things it swore it kept out. And yet an independent laboratory found glyphosate, the weed killer, in Roundup, at more than 1,000 parts per billion in their whole wheat sandwich bread. One of the highest readings ever recorded for a packaged loaf in this country. A grandmother reaches for that because of the name over the door. She pays more for it. She trusts what the shop claims to stand for, and it carried more weed killer than nearly anything else on the shelf. When the store that promised the most delivers that, it tells you something about the whole aisle. Next is Dave's Killer Breads. And I name it without any pleasure because this is the loaf the health-minded reach for, with real confidence. The bold bag, the seedy loaf, a good redemption story, printed on the wrapper, the organic seal. And I will give it its due, honestly. The numbers the labs found were lower than the cheap conventional brands, a good deal lower, but here is the trouble. This is a loaf that built its whole name on being Gavengru, the clean one. And it charges the price to match. Lower was not the promise. 0 was the promise. Low is a broken promise you paid extra to receive. And the founder's story stayed on the bag while a $5 billion bread company, Flowers Foods, bought it and quietly moved its own supply chain in behind that story. That brings me to something worth understanding before I go further, because it explains half of this list. Pepperidge Farm, the red bag, the old-fashioned letters, the name that sounds like a farm with a stone wall and a garden. An independent laboratory placed their whole grain loaf near 600 parts per billion. And here is the hard part for the health-minded. Whole wheat keeps the outer skin of the grain, and that skin is exactly where the residue settles because the weed killer is sprayed onto the standing crop days before harvest to dry it for the machines. So the loaf marked healthiest can carry more of the very thing you were trying to avoid than the plain white beside it. Choosing the whole grain here can, at times, mean choosing more of the poison, not less. Now let me take a whole cluster together, because they share one parent and the same faults, and there is no wisdom in saying it 5 separate times. Wonder Bread, Nature's Own, and Sara Lee Honey Wheat. Grandmother names, each of them, with packaging that promises a kitchen counter and a simpler time. The health department in Florida tested them and found glyphosate in all of them, and Sara Lee posted the highest single reading in that whole round of testing. This from a loaf with one of honey and frein in its name and corn syrup in its ingredients. Read those labels and you find things no kitchen ever held. Calcium sulfate, the same compound used to set drywall. Datum. Sodium stearoyl lactylate. Calcium propionate. Long words that do one job. Hold a loaf soft and shelf-stable for weeks, past the moment bread ought to have turned. That springy give in the bag is not freshness, it is chemistry. Wonder and Nature's Own come from the one company. Sara Lee from another giant. Same paste, same warm and wholesome packaging, the same quiet trick. And then the organic loaves that surprised people the most. Market Pantry Organic, Oro Wheat Organic, and Arnold Organic. You would think the organic seal settles the matter. It does not, and here is the honest reason why. That seal promises the farmer. Did not spray the weed killer on purpose. It does not promise that none drifted over on the wind from the field next door, and it does not promise the finished loaf was ever tested at all. Market Pantry's organic loaf tested higher than some plain, conventional bread, and Arnold, from the same large parent that owns Oro Wheat, had no public test data I could find anywhere. 85 years of a good name, and not one number they were willing to place in front of you. Now I will not claim to know what lives in a loaf no one has tested. I cannot. But a company that tests everything else and falls silent on this one, that silence is its own kind of answer. And last on the leave it list, the cheap one. Great value. Whole wheat, the store loaf that fills the basket, because it is cheap and always there. A laboratory placed it near 340 parts per billion. The regulators will tell you that is legal, and it is, their ceiling sits very high. But that ceiling was measured for one chemical, in one food, for one healthy grown man in the strength of his years. It was never measured for a woman in her 70s who takes medicine for her blood pressure, who received a little of this residue from her breakfast, a little more from her afternoon crackers, and now a little more again from her sandwich, all inside the same day. In my tradition we watch how small things accumulate, quietly, over years. The residue stacks. The regulator's arithmetic does not. The 80 cents you saved arrived carrying something that was never printed on the bag. Now the loaves that are actually honest, let me clear the counter and give you the 3 I would carry to my own table, and I will begin with the best. The finest of them, to my mind, is Silver Hills Sprouted Bakery. A family-run company from Canada. Every loaf they bake is tested for glyphosate and returns below what the laboratory can even detect, and they do this batch after batch without ceasing. When the world's cancer researchers marked that weed killer back in 2015, this company stated plainly that it changed how it sourced its grain because of it. That is a maker bowing to the evidence rather than hiring lawyers to quarrel with it. And I place it first for a simple reason. The loaf is hearty, yet soft enough for a grandchild's sandwich straight from the bag. It is the easy change, the one you need not think twice about. It costs more, and you may have to seek it at a natural grocer. Both of those things are true. They are also simply what it costs to test every batch and to grow the grain in an honest way. Number 2. 1 Degree Organics. And this one does a thing almost no other bread company troubles to do. They print the farm for every single ingredient, scan the small square on the bag, and you may trace the wheat back to the exact field where it grew. Not the country, not the region, the field. They send their loaves to an outside laboratory month after month, and no law requires it of them. They do it because placing the number before you is the only honest way to prove what you are selling. The list on the back is short, and every word upon it is food. Open the bag and it smells of grain. Pull it, and it tears the way baked bread tears, instead of springing back like a sponge. And number 3. Food for Life's Ezekiel 4.9 No. Here is a thing most people do not know. There is no flour in it at all. They sprout the whole grains and the legumes and bake them slowly. A wholly different craft than milling white flour and pumping it full of conditioners. It carries a seal that certifies the finished loaf tested clean, not merely the farmer's good intentions. 11 ingredients, each of them a food you could name. It is dense and chewy, best toasted, and you will find it in the freezer case. And with no preservatives, it moulds at room temperature within a few days, which is not a flaw. That is the proof that you are holding actual food. A living thing behaves like a living thing. Here is the line running down the middle. Do you see it now running clean down the middle of these 13? On the leave it side, it is the same story each time. White flour stripped and bleached, a residue of weed killer from grain, dried with chemicals in the field, and a long line of hard words whose only task is to hold a dead loaf soft for a month. On the honest side, it is also the same story each time. Real grain, a short list you can read, a maker who tests the loaf and shows you the number, and bread that turns stale and moulds the way bread was always meant to. And I will say it plainly, this is not a conspiracy. No one planned it in a room. It is only what happens when bread is made by the million, to survive months on a shelf and cross a country in a truck. Every cheap shortcut that lets them charge less, or hold it soft longer, is folded in. And the honest short-list loaf costs a little more to make, so it is pushed to the dearer shelf. And the great bakers profit quietly from every soft loaf a tired parent grabs, believing that bread is only bread, the rule that carries you through the aisle. So here is the rule that will carry you past this whole shelf, and you need not memorize one of these 13 names to use it. Turn the bag over and count the list. If it reads flour, water, salt, yeast, and perhaps a little honest oil, 5 things you can name, that is bread. If it runs on past 5 into a thicket of words you cannot pronounce, sulfates and datum and conditioners, set it down. And buy from the cold case when you can, for a loaf that lives for weeks on a warm shelf was built for the truck, and a loaf that hardens and moulds within a few days was built for you. Short list. Real grain. Turns stale as it should. You do not need the laboratory. You need only to read the back and to trust the loaf that knows how to spoil. Now I wish to hear from you, for you teach me as much as I teach you. This week leave whatever loaf sits in your kitchen out upon the counter and watch it. Did it go hard and mould within a few days, like honest bread? Or is it still soft and springing come next Sunday? Tell me in the comments below. Read me the first few things from the label and tell me the brand. And while you are there, tell me your town and how old the house is that you live in. I like to know from where you are all writing and whether anyone near you still bakes a real loaf in the old way. I read everyone, and that is precisely where we are going next. I will bring you into my wife's kitchen and show you how she bakes our bread from grain. We grind ourselves, the mixing of the 4 honest things, the slow rising, the baking in our own oven, so that you may taste what bread was always meant to be, with a list you could count upon one hand. We will do it together, for none of this was ever complicated. Bread is grain and water and salt and time. That is all it has ever been for 1,000 years and more. We allowed bakers we will never meet to fill it with paste and conditioners and a residue of weed killer, and to sell it back to us softer, emptier and cheaper, and we stopped reading the bag because bread is only bread. But the label tells the truth to anyone who turns it over, and the counter tells the rest. For 100 generations our grandmothers knew every grain that went into the pot, and called their food the first medicine. We forgot for a little while, we are only just beginning to remember. Read the label, count the list, buy from the cold case, and I will see you next time.